Welcome once again to the Urban Agenda. I'm David R. Jones, President of the Community Service Society of New York and your host. Today we'll deal with a subject that just won't seem to go away, the mayor's campaign to privatize municipal hospitals. Despite lawsuits by the City Council, unions, and board members of the Health and Hospitals Corporation claiming that privatization would ultimately deprive the poor of proper medical care, the administration clings to its vision of turning over municipal hospitals to profit-making organizations. Here to discuss the issue with me are Diane Lacey-Winley, Associate Pastor of the United Church of Spring Valley and a member of the HHC Board, and Edward Sadowski, attorney for the City Council in its successful suit to stop privatization of Coney Island Hospital. Diane, you and I are among the dissenting board members of HHC who are concerned about privatization. What are your principal concerns?
My major concern is that the city residents have come to expect quality health care from all of our public hospitals. And this plan that is moving so quickly to lease Coney Island Hospital for close to 200 years has so many unanswered questions, questions that, if answered negatively, may deprive residents of the Coney Island community of the full services, full health services that they require and they need. And all of our requests for information to help us adequately answer these questions have really been denied.
Ed, I know you represent the City Council. Of course, you were a distinguished member of the City Council not too many years ago. What's the basis of the City Council suit?
Well, you must understand that in the first instance here, I'm talking as lawyer for the City Council.
Right.
I may have some personal views, which I'll express later. But essentially, what the City Council says, you cannot take an institution, the public hospitals, which have been in existence for more than 100 years, and turn them over to private hands by the decision of a single person. Mm-hmm. And essentially, to answer some of the questions that Diane raised, the City Council says, whatever you're going to do with respect to municipal hospitals is entitled to a full public hearing before the City Council, so it's the people who make the decision and not a single person, the mayor of the City of New York. As you know, David, you're a member of the board, but you also know that the board is so structured so that it will be controlled at any moment in time by the incumbent mayor, whoever it happens to be. And that means, really, one person is making this decision. And the City Council, as the city's legislative body, says this is not right. You need a full public debate on the issue.
I just want to mention that a very hastily called public hearing was held in the Coney Island community, and it was held before the full contract was even released. And 99% of the people who testified, and these are community residents, these are health experts, as well as all of the public officials from the borough, testified, as well as citywide, testified against this proposal. And one questioner said, how is it possible in a democracy that the public could be 100% against this, the public officials could be 100% against this, and yet the plan is moving forward?
Well, I guess that does raise, I mean, the Coney Island Hospital deal was unique in a number of ways. I don't believe there's another private hospital operator currently in the City of New York.
Nor in the state. Nor
in the state. So this would be a first in many respects, or at least a recent first.
Yes, we've had a policy statewide against accepting or inviting into the state private corporations to run public entities. And this private corporation, particularly coming from Cleveland, with a track record that is not at all comparable, dealing with a population or the numbers that we deal with at Coney Island, and questions being raised about the changes in their administration of services when they took over those Cleveland hospitals. The decreases in budget, the decreases in services really raise alarms for us.
Right. Ed, what did the judge say specifically?
Essentially, he said that the way the law was written and the way it must be construed, that this is an issue which must be decided finally by the city council and not by the mayor. Now, it is true that the city council, if the judge's decision is upheld, and you should know, of course, that the mayor has said he's intending to appeal that decision and will do so. But if the judge is upheld, it means that there will be a vote by the city council, and whatever way it goes, it will be representing a majority of the people of the city of New York through their elected representatives. But what is more important than that, and I consider the hearing that was held at the HHC sort of a kangaroo court, because in effect the result was predestined. Right. I think you'd find in the legislative process that the concern that many of the people spoke to at that meeting would be addressed. Now, for example, the great unsolved problem in the nation, especially with the defeat of the federal legislation with respect to hospital care, is the treatment of the indigent poor. And that is an issue that people really haven't come to understand. The indigent poor are not welfare people, nor are they SSI people. The indigent poor are, by and large, those people in our society who work but can't work for a company, or do not work for a company that will provide health care. Most of us get some kind of health care. We got a private policy, you get Medicare if you get old, and if you're very poor, you get Medicaid. And there is 30 million people in America, a good many of whom live in New York, who've got nothing. And that's where the public hospitals have begun, have taken up the role. They do it.
I think one of the concerns we had, Diane, myself, and Jim Dumpson, the dissident board members at HHC, we couldn't get them even factoring in the issue of welfare reform and its almost immediate impact in increasing the number of uninsured. Because obviously when you lose welfare, either instantly or over time, you lose your Medicaid entitlement.
Right.
And I think that's clearly going to swell the numbers of uninsured in the city of New York, and who will have to use public hospitals.
Now, it is also true, David, as you probably know, that the sublease with this private hospital from Cleveland purports to try to do something about that. And in my judgment, not speaking for the council, I want to make it very clear that in my personal judgment, that the provisions that it has in that sublease with respect to what you do about what I call, that the state calls charity cases, but they really are not. It's the indigent poor, generally working people. What it does about that particular problem is totally inadequate. And one would hope that if this gets to a hearing to the city council, that would be just one of many issues to be addressed.
And not only that, but this is a pattern, I think, that we see nationwide when the private sector comes in, that they underestimate the costs of taking care of the poor, and then what happens is that the local government, city, county, or state, then has to pick up the tab, so that the city residents will have to pay for this inevitably.
I don't know if our audience knows, of course, that the HHC was never even presented with a business plan of how this private vendor was going to actually operate. That was going to come well down the road.
Or very much about this private vendor, by the way.
There was also an interesting question, which, having been a corporate lawyer in my life, by their very natures, if corporations aren't economically successful, they close. There's clearly no guarantees. Obviously, if they make a miscalculation because of a failure to have an adequate business plan of what the HHC and the City of New York and obviously all the patients would do in the event of a business failure. And I don't think that wasn't even particularly addressed.
You also raised in your opening remarks, David, the issue relating to the poor who use the hospitals as really the medical service of first resort. The and those are people who are generally covered by Medicaid.
Absolutely.
And they can and should be served in any hospital in the city of New York, whether it's private, voluntary, or public. But we know, as a matter of fact, that they can frequently, and even in the so-called nonprofit voluntary hospitals, be shortchanged. There were several scandalous stories about that not too long ago, about putting Medicaid patients on one floor and the better paying patients on another. And that's the kind of issue that has to be addressed and resolved. And
one of the things I'd like to put out, this is not scientific, but I can't understand this almost obsession with privatization, particularly now that the city's subsidy for HHC has basically dropped to zero when you take out. Why do we believe the mayor is so obsessed with privatization, from your perspective?
Well, I think
this is all speculation.
You know, this is of course speculation, but unless anyone would think we're stacking the deck here, in our view. The fact is that it is frequently the case that government bureaucracies do not operate institutions like hospitals very effectively and well. And one of the reasons for privatization is that privatization drives more effective and efficient operation because there's a bottom line, there is a profit. But something very, very extraordinary is happening in the medical field and the hospital field, particularly these days. Even the public hospitals, your HHC hospitals, the ones that you govern, are understanding that they are caught in a competitive need to look for what they call catchment areas, to find their ways to being more attractive, to draw in more patients. And they are being driven today to exercise the same constraints and exercise the same cost efficiencies that frequently happen in private business. I've got a young nephew who, as you know, is a medical director of one of the city public hospitals, and daily he is concerned about competing for patients, because that's what the drive is. And even though that hospital is still a public hospital.
I've talked to some of the mayor's people and tried to argue that he's done more in terms of reform by getting this system to finally take itself seriously as a competitive entity. And basically they should have declared victory now. But what do you think?
I want to just second that. I think the mayor has to be given credit for taking a stand and supporting a direction that we have been asking for a number of years, and that is getting the voluntaries and the medical schools that serve as our affiliates to pare down their costs, be more accountable, and all of that is going to help us reach the bottom line. And we have not had an administration, a city administration in the past, that has been willing to step up in the way this mayor has. And this will all go to help the public hospitals be more efficient.
So I think that that's exactly the case. You must give the mayor credit for getting the HHC and the private medical schools and the voluntary hospitals that service the public hospitals to get their act together and to meet the economic needs of the times.
But go ahead.
But it seems to me that until you establish that way of doing it, it has failed or is not working. And I think it's working wonderfully well at the moment. It's no point going the next step and simply giving away the hospitals to an institution that wants to make a profit on medical care.
That's exactly what I wanted to, I feel so passionately about. The mayor needs to understand that in the public hospital system, the Health and Hospitals Corporation of today, he already has the model that people all over the country are imitating. We have the system with our neighborhood family care centers, our outreach with our tertiary care centers. We already have the system. It just needs to be fine-tuned and modified somewhat, but we don't need to abandon it in favor of privatization.
And what that will mean, if it works, and it's got to be given a chance to work, because this is a relatively recent effort. It has to be given a chance to work, that you will find throughout the system people who are as concerned with efficiency as any private operator, but are also informed and concerned with a public need.
Yeah.
That is to say,
Yes.
the bottom line dollar profit is not necessarily as important as adequate care.
There's some interesting allies also developing for the public hospital system, actually in the voluntary system, the not-for-profit hospital system, because there's a growing realization that because as costs continue to escalate for them, and as the difficulty in really providing uninsured care continues to be a major drain on them, that they may not be able to do without a public hospital system and survive.
Well, it started out that the voluntaries were doing a great favor by taking the municipal hospitals under their wings in the affiliation contract. It turns out that they are absolute necessities for them. That they are teaching hospitals essentially need the patient load at these municipal hospitals. Now, it is also true, and this is not only as a result of the drive in New York, but also in Washington, that the voluntaries became pretty bloated in their operations, and were not efficient and were not cost effective. And now they are driven to undertake those economies, but to deprive them of their municipal hospitals is going to be a great loss for them and for the public.
Speaking of the public, let me just throw in one more thing, and that is, Ed, that during your reign in the City Council, the Health and Hospitals Corporation was set up, and one of our major responsibilities is being able to represent the public in looking at these hospitals. And under privatization, the accountability to the public is just not there. There is a board that's put together, again, by this same entity, PHS, Primary Health Systems, and the mayor, with a couple of representatives from the Health and Hospitals Corporation. So it removes the accountability of the board, the HHC board, and the Community Advisory Board at Coney Island Hospital, which is now largely made up of citizens from the various community boards.
Once again, David, to be fair, the documents themselves show some oversight requirements, but the opportunity of any branch of government, whether the city controller or the mayor's office, to look into the operation of the private hospital. But unfortunately, those oversight responsibilities generally result in reports that take place 2 years after the disaster has occurred. That's
what would be our ideal sort of healthcare system for the poor? What if we had our druthers now? We were back in power, or particularly in Ed's case. How would we structure this system to really work and sustain itself?
Okay. The first thing is to say there should be no system for the poor. Every person in the United States should be entitled to adequate health care. This is not a charity. It's absolutely essential to the well-being of the republic. And the ideal goal, David, in my judgment, once again, is it makes no difference what your income level is. Once you walk into any hospital, you should get the same treatment as anybody else. Now that's the ideal, and it's going to take a long time to get there, I'm afraid, the way we run the business now. But in the interim, I suspect is that we need hospitals which are cost efficient, that is to say, are driven by the needs to contain costs, because that's a major social problem in the United States, is the escalation of medical costs, but at the same time are thoroughly informed with the need that we don't have a perfect system yet, and that there are poor who don't have primary physicians, and there are poor who work very hard every day but don't have a hospital plan.
Right.
And that's where the public role should be and the city role.
Let me
your
agree
vision?
with everything that Ed has said. I agree with that. And just to say also that we need more democracy in the system. I'd like to see the City Council, I'd like to see the board of the Health and Hospitals Corporation changed so that there could be more City Council designates and the board could be much more independent. Also, we need more emphasis system-wide on health education, health prevention, preventative health, so that we can do what we can to help people get well and stay well. And finally, I had been dreaming a long time about a public medical school, and that is a medical school that was designed by both the need and community people, and where we could have older people trained as medical workers, and that these health professionals would come from urban areas and would be committed to work in the urban health system. So there was a plan about 10 years ago developed by people at Metropolitan and Marshall England and others that I would like to see looked at again.
So to make this whole.
Yeah,
Yes.
and while we get to the ideal, you know, there are some very wonderful developments. You look around the city, you find outreach posts of virtually every hospital, and then a place where, so that the emergency room, which is the first port of call for most poor people, doesn't have to be the first port of call. That's happening. Those things are happening. Those are good things.
It's interesting to notice how loyal a large number of the patients are to HHC facilities. We started at HHC an HMO called Metro Plus. And we were shocked with the sort of land rush of enrollment. And it was interesting when they did focus groups with the individuals, everyone, the bad picture of HHC, why would you? He said, I didn't join HHC's HMO. I joined Elmhurst. I joined Woodhall's.
Right.
And basically, I've been going there, I've learned how to use the system, and now you're allowing me to get access to my own physician and a card that allows me to get pharmacy wherever I want in the city. They were coming for that because poor people in many of these communities rely so desperately on these institutions and had no face-to-face the individuals there.
Well, another thing that is often overlooked in this debate, and what you would not expect from private institutions, but you certainly should expect from public institutions, the first step in adequate health care is education. If the patient doesn't understand what he must do and where he must go and what he needs in terms of monitoring and what he needs in terms of annual physicals and where the places that he can get that and where his blood pressure can be taken, that is a function, a public function, because unfortunately the poor are not frequently as well educated as they might be, and they need to have that education.
And you know what else is new in our latest contracts? The doctors, the physicians, the residents, and the administrative staffs are all now also required to be culturally aware and sensitive, able to communicate in the various languages of our patients. So that's been one of our failings too. We've got to work on both sides. We've got to get our people educated, our patients, and we've got to get our physicians and health workers to be able to communicate more effectively.
Just to echo your and Ed's comments, the Community Service Society, which I'm head of, just completed a study looking at enrollees, Medicaid enrollees into HMOs, including Metro Plus. The numbers were staggering. You found 80% who really didn't know what they had been enrolled in. A third didn't even know they were enrolled. So there's a lot, the education thing is primary.
It's absolutely essential.
One of the things in closing I'd like to talk about is the capital needs of HHC. There's one question, some are saying, you know, it doesn't really matter whether it's privatized or not. If HHC can't get access to capital to rebuild its facilities, like Kings County and other parts, Queens and the rest, that this is all over anyway. What do you think about the capital?
This is something I think we've got to criticize the mayor for. I think through most of his administration, he has dumped on or allowed his people And he himself has said so many negative things about the Health and Hospitals Corporation that our ability to float bonds and our position in the market has definitely been weakened.
Ken, is there any hope for getting capital rehabilitation?
David,
you know the Queen's neighborhood.
The need is obviously there. But as you know, the city's fiscal situation, despite its very rosy year this year in terms of a blip in income, is not very good. We've reached the limit of capital expenditure, and you've got and there are just limits on what can be built.
It would be critical, actually, to have the city council start to participate in this, because I think many people who are middle and working class don't see any connection to HHC.
Yeah.
I think what started to show me, we had a medical emergency some years ago with the birth of my second child. Before we were finished, without medical insurance, I had to come up with a substantial amount of money, but the entire procedure came to $120,000. And without medical insurance, which more and more working people are finding that they're not being offered, that they may think of themselves as earning substantial amounts of money, but no one can cope with even a minor significant medical procedure. And I think the growing awareness that many of us who are just think of ourselves as middle class may end up having to turn to HHC facilities.
Whatever we think of the potential for getting people off welfare into jobs, which is the major thrust of the federal government today, it is very likely that even when they move into jobs, they will not move into jobs that have medical insurance
and that's true.
of any kind whatsoever. So the problem, the medical care problem, will persist.
And we're finding more and more voluntary hospitals, and I'm not denigrating them, who just can't bear the weight of someone who comes in with no medical insurance.
That's right.
This is an issue that all residents of New York City should be involved in. But unfortunately, like the undertaker, we tend not to want to think about the hospital until we need it. But it is an institution. The public hospitals are institutions that we must all be concerned about.
Ed, Diane, thank you very much. With 25% of its 8 million people at the poverty line, New York City can't afford to close the doors of its public hospitals just yet. Because so few doctors are still practicing in poor neighborhoods, many residents use hospital emergency rooms as their primary care facilities. Last year, public hospitals counted 4.8 million outpatient visits. For the rest of New York City's inhabitants who don't use them, these hospitals provide health insurance. Those same public hospitals control long-term, socially unacceptable diseases like TB and AIDS, and keep the rest of us from being swept away in epidemics. Rich or poor, we need our public hospitals. This is David R. Jones. Thank you for joining me on the Urban Agenda.
To comment on the Urban Agenda or for more information on CSS, contact Community Service Society of New York, 105 East 22nd Street, New York, New York, 10010. Area code 212-254-8900.